Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you, Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to explore arguing. I want to look at how to argue properly versus how to argue dirty. This becomes an issue of civility. It becomes an issue of the rules that we have around argument that exist in society for a reason, and yet are often forgotten, especially in the realms of religion and politics, which, while we are to avoid them within the lodge, of course, necessarily come up because we are human and we live in a world surrounded by religion and politics. What I want to explore is why some arguments leave us feeling stronger and closer to someone, and others leave us feeling crushed, humiliated, furious. These are the rules. This is the idea that can separate a debate in lodge between two people. It can separate a lodge if not done properly. And these are rules that are not often taught today. I'm not going into all of them. There are several books on the topic. But I do want to get into the big ones, the big issues that come up. And not only how shouldn't we argue, but how should we? How can we debate a topic with respect and do so calmly and properly so that our ideas get across, rather than falling on deaf ears that have shut down because something was said? So let's start at the beginning. What is a proper argument? First off, arguing properly doesn't mean you're an emotionless robot. It doesn't mean that you show absolutely zero emotion, zero empathy. It doesn't mean that you have to agree on everything. It doesn't mean you have to validate everything or even walk away completely satisfied. Arguing properly means that both people feel respected at the end of the day, even if they disagree. Let me give you an example. Imagine in lodge there's a hot debate about whether the lodge should spend money on some fee that has come up. And the brothers argue back and forth. This could end one of two ways. It could end with the lodge splitting and many people going home angry, or it could end in such a way that everyone goes to the wherever later on and hangs out, has a good chat. It's like it never happened. That's the difference between good argument and bad, between proper argument and fighting dirty, as it were. Proper discussion, proper argument is about making your point clearly, preferably concisely. Listening actively. You need to actively listen to the person you're hearing from. You don't want to build a defense or build an argument in your head while they're talking, because if you're doing that, you're not listening. You want to respect the other person's dignity and stick to the issue at hand. You can't sit there and say, well, I believe we need a dishwasher and here's the reason. And by the way, remember the last time you brought up a point, Bob, it resulted in us losing $1,000. That would not be appropriate because it's not sticking to the issue. It's about battling ideas, not battling people. In a proper argument, the focus is on what's true, what's right, what's best for everyone involved, not on who can hit hardest emotionally. Good arguments might include things like, here's what I think and here's why. Or, I understand what you're saying, but I see it differently. Or, let's find a solution that works for both of us. You stay focused on the problem. You don't worry about the person. We are focusing on the idea, the argument, never ever going after the person. That's called ad hominem attack. It's a huge issue. So what does arguing dirty mean? What's a poor argument look like? That's a whole different animal. Arguing dirty is when you stop trying to solve the problem and start trying to win at any cost. And there are certain common traits that we see in these situations. Things like insults and name calling. Again, ad hominem attack. You don't go after the person. And by the way, many of these ideas, if you were ever in debate in high school or college, you'll recognize them as the rules of debate. They apply in a general social sense as well. You don't bring up old mistakes because that would be taking it off the topic. It's called potato sacking. And the idea is you're just throwing a bunch of stuff on to effectively win. You're not trying to come to any compromise or understanding. Ultimately, in an argument, you have two choices. You can compromise or fail. And the faster you recognize that, the faster you can get to a conclusion. We see people twisting other people's words or adding interpretations that would have never been reasonably added to those words. Yes, we interpret all the time what someone says. However, you have to do so reasonably. Any form of public shaming is problematic, or, although we don't typically see it in a lodge, yelling or intimidation. Yelling or intimidation is nothing more than trying to instill fear and take control. When you argue improperly, it's all about power, not progress. Instead of saying, I disagree with your opinion, someone might say, you're stupid for thinking that. Obviously, that's going to shut down the conversation. It's going to end things. Most people will walk away from that statement. Instead of saying, I'm frustrated that you didn't call, or I'm frustrated that you didn't do this thing, someone might say, you never care about anyone but yourself. Again, that's a personal attack. You're labeling, you're characterizing someone. You should see the difference. One addresses the issue. I'm frustrated that you didn't do this thing. The other attacks character. You never care about anyone but yourself. You might as well just say you're selfish and throw that out there. And the worst part, inappropriate arguments damage trust. It leaves emotional scars. It's what leads to people walking away from lodge and never being heard from again. One minute, this guy is an active member. The next minute, he's completely disappeared. And that is something we can't afford to do. Even if you win the fight using these tactics, you will lose something larger. You will lose the relationship. Relationship with the brother, a partner, a family member, could be anything. So let's look at some of these classic, what I'll refer to as dirty moves that people pull, sometimes without realizing it. Some of this is subconscious. They go, this is a brilliant argument, and they don't realize what they've just done. For example, straw man arguments. This is when someone twists your words into something you didn't actually say and attacks that. For example, you might say, I think we should spend less on entertainment to save money. And they might say, oh, so you think we should never have fun again? Well, no, that's not at all what I said. They're taking the base words, the base idea that you presented, they're taking it out to an extreme and then twisting or flipping it to create a situation where spending less on entertainment to save money becomes we should never have fun again. We also see ad hominem attacks. This is when someone attacks you instead of the argument. For example, you're too young to understand becomes you would say that you're just selfish. And so those both are attacks against you. You're too young or you're selfish. In the lodge, oftentimes, these don't happen in lodge, but you'll see guys who will sit there and go, well, you just want to spend all of the lodge's money. That's a personal attack. Whether it's true or not is completely irrelevant. Truth is not always a defense, especially when it's a truth that's been misinterpreted or twisted. Then we have, well, referred to as whataboutism or woulda, coulda, shoulda. Instead of addressing the issue, the person brings up something else you did wrong. For example, you forgot my birthday. Well, what about the times you forgot our anniversary? This becomes very problematic because what you're doing is basically moving the goalpost. So a lodge example, hey, why aren't we spending, we're arguing over spending this money for a specific thing. And then someone says, but we don't spend, you turned down a motion that I brought 2 weeks ago about whether or not we should give $200 to charity. So why should we do this? These two things are unrelated. Gaslighting. We see this more in personal relationships, but I can't talk about arguing without touching on personal relationships. This is making someone doubt their memory, feelings, or sanity. I never said that. You're imagining things. It's a very common example. And it should be noted, gaslighting is really misunderstood today. It has nothing to do with lying. It's not, oh, hey, they lied. It's gaslighting. That's very pop psychology. Gaslighting is with the intent of control and manipulation. Stonewalling. In other words, shutting down completely, refusing to listen, giving the silent treatment. We've all seen this in Lodge. Someone makes their point, someone argues against it, and then that person just does not speak at all. Now, it could be that they're not speaking because they have nothing else to say, but it could also be that they're not speaking because they just basically are in their own world saying, you know what, F you guys, I'm done. I'm not dealing with this. You don't want to do that, because if you're the person shutting down completely or refusing to listen, it doesn't advance anything. It doesn't help anything. You want to continue to be that active listener. You want to continue to participate until the disagreement reaches a natural end. Now, if you spot these tactics, whether you're doing them yourself or someone else is, it's a red flag. It means the argument is no longer about solving a problem. It's about punishing, controlling, escaping responsibility, defending, all of these things. And I can't emphasize enough, you'll notice I said whether you're doing them or someone else is. It's always easiest to see when someone else is doing it, but we need to be able to stop and recognize when we're doing these things, because that becomes deeply problematic too. We want to improve ourselves consistently, and if we don't, that's an issue. That's not really Masonic to sort of sit there and say, you know what, I'm done. So we want to continue to reflect. We want to think about these things. So why do people use these tactics? Why do we sometimes slip into inappropriate behavior in arguments? Why do we sometimes fight dirty? The short answer is emotions. The Stoics had it right. When people feel threatened, misunderstood, powerless, they often lash out. It's a defense mechanism, a way to protect their ego, pride, or sense of control. Some people will act out of emotion rapidly, and we all know those people. We may be those people. Sometimes it's a learned behavior. If you watched people argue as you grew up by screaming, insulting, or avoiding problems, it may feel perfectly normal, but just because it feels normal to you doesn't mean it's healthy or appropriate within the larger society. Other times, it's because arguing this way makes you feel powerful in the moment. It's a shortcut to winning. It's that snide comeback that just wins the argument. I mean, it never really does, but we like to think that it will, or at least making the other person feel small. But remember, winning the battle and losing the war is not a victory. There are many times that you may win that individual argument and they go, yep, okay, fine, you do your thing. And then you completely lose the relationship. You've lost the war. And it's more especially true if it destroys trust, respect, and closeness. Things that the Lodge is built on. You might as well write brotherhood there, and it's the same thing. This is why we need to be civil. That's why the gentleman in the room, calling on Most Worshipful Brother Dave Ritchie, those ideas of civility are so important. Here I'm just dealing with it in argument, but we can deal with it elsewhere as well. So now that we've talked about what not to do, let's talk about what to do. So how do you keep things clean when arguments get messy? Here's 6 ways of doing it. First and foremost, stay on topic. So if the argument is about one thing, you keep it on that one thing. You do not let it drift into other territory. This is more common in personal relationships, but it happens. So for example, if the fight is about money, you don't bring up your partner's bad driving habits. You deal with one issue at a time. It's tempting to go, hey, we dealt with that one. Let's deal with these others. It doesn't work. And if you start just listing things, then it gets to the point that the other person's going to be overwhelmed and shut down anyway. It's not going to help. Use I statements. I feel frustrated when. I need help with. I believe. In the Lodge, it's often I believe, I think. And those I statements go a long way because you're not accusing anyone of anything. You're just putting your opinion out there. And we see this a lot. People are really good at this one. It's just one of those things that you need to keep in mind, especially when things get heated. Because instead of blaming, you're sharing. And it sounds woo-woo, touchy-feely. But at the end of the day, it's actually a really powerful thing. And if you look at people in powerful positions, this is oftentimes how they speak. This is a really good tool. Next, assume good intentions. Even if you're angry, remember most people aren't trying to hurt you or the lodge. Give them the benefit of the doubt. That guy that you're arguing with about the dishwasher isn't trying to make your life difficult. He isn't trying to sit there and say that the lodge doesn't need this thing or that, your ideas are horrible or anything else. He's just viewing or airing his opinion. And you need to see it that way. Don't look at them as the enemy. Look at them as another opinion, another idea. Take breaks when you need to. If emotions are boiling up, I strongly suggest to any worshipful master that they remember they have a gavel. If things are getting heated, gavel it. You can go informal and just take a break for 5 minutes. You could just gavel it and say, we'll talk about it again in 2 weeks. You could gavel it and say, you know what? Things are just getting heated. We're not going to participate in this piece of the conversation. You can do a lot of different things. But that break becomes really important because if emotions are starting to boil over, that's where things will only escalate. And you don't want to get to that point. It's better to pause than to say something you'll regret or watch the lodge fracture in front of you. Next, listen to understand, not to respond. Don't just wait your turn to talk. Actually try to get where they're coming from. Focus when someone else is speaking on their ideas. And then take that 10 seconds or whatever it's going to be between when they stop and when you decide to start your argument to put your argument together. If you're sitting in the back of your head trying to come up with great comebacks or great arguments, then part of your brain is turned off to what they're saying. You have to be conscious of this. If you find yourself making arguments in your head, you need to find a way to just recognize that and say, all right, I need to get back on track. I need to listen to what's being said. And if the opponent, if the other person is using inappropriate tactics, ad hominem attacks, straw men, twisting words, whatever it is, call it out, but do so calmly. If someone attacks you instead of your ideas, name it. Say something like, that feels like a personal attack. Can we focus on the issue? Which acknowledges what they just did and calls it out without making it the entire basis of the argument, without shifting the argument. It calls us back to the issue. And that's really important. It's also important to remember the goal isn't to be perfect. Perfection is not a human trait. Is to argue or debate in a way that actually solves problems, that leads to relationships becoming stronger, not weaker. Arguing properly isn't about being soft or passive. That's absolutely not the point, although people will take it that way. It's about being strong enough to stay respectful. And it takes a huge amount of control over ourselves to do that, especially in a heated argument. To remain respectful. It's not about being soft. It's about being powerful, about being in control of our faculties. And if we can do that, then that puts us in a better position. And this becomes even more important if you notice yourself getting upset. When you fight fair, you protect your dignity. But you also protect the other person's dignity. That's what draws you closer. The more that you can have these difficult conversations or conversations where you don't agree and come back as friends, go and buy that beer after lodge, the stronger your relationship is going to be. That is one of the great strengths, one of the great powers of Freemasonry. And you may actually have a shot at resolving things instead of simply letting resentment and bitterness grow. It's not easy. Not at all. It takes a lot of reflection. It's going to take time where you come back at the end of the day and go, wow, that did not go well. And you try and figure out why it didn't go well and everything else. But it's worth it, because most arguments really aren't about winning. There isn't a winning side. They're about trying to understand, respect, and grow. And if you see an argument about winning, you run into a trap. I've yet to come across an argument where the options were winning or losing. Generally speaking, the options are losing or compromising, or at least listening. And that's what we need to do. There's rarely a win in an argument. Look at your lodge. Look at some of the recent arguments you guys may have had. There probably wasn't anything that you could define as a winning side, and yet hopefully your lodge got through it and everything was fine. That's why this is important. It's about civility. It's about control, and it's about being the gentleman in the room. Very much in that vein, started by Most Worshipful Dave Ritchie, when he has brought many pieces of education on that idea, many articles in Masonic Journal on that idea to light, and tried to draw us to exactly these conclusions in many ways. That being said, thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Lickey, and the rest of the Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.